Chapter 9. After High School Part 2, Fall Term 2012 to Spring Term 2013. The fall of 2012. Early August is when I started practicing at grocery store Coop located in Tag, but then after only 3 weeks, I decided to quit. I never came up with any good reason, but my actual reason, which of course I didn't tell Iris Hodder, was that I wanted to start hanging at a high school every day. They had planned that I would be transferred from Iris Hodder, who also put me here, to the job center, a place where people search for jobs, and that I also would start working there 4 hours a day, plus have a lunch break which would require me to make a lunchbox at home every evening before going to work and bring it with me. Working 4 hours a day wasn't a problem, but I really didn't appreciate the lunch thing. That would also turn out to have catastrophic consequences already in the winter of 2013 at another place, Viva Resource. I had to leave the place after 6 weeks due to having my life's very first panic anxiety attack. Later though, when having a goodbye meeting at Iris Hodder, I told them I had constant muscle aches in my right arm and right thigh. Then they said that might be the reason I couldn't stay at Coop. Now that wasn't my actual reason at all, so I really didn't have that excuse, but I could have used that excuse previously. Other than a lousy diet, plus having used my right arm a lot more than the left, of course I can't write left-handed, it might have also been because I'd been tuning so many guitars at 4 Sound for about the last 6 months, which was my main task there. Obviously it hurt my right thigh a lot. Since then, I've become a lot better using my left hand, so badly that I can hardly use my right hand when brushing my teeth since probably 2015. At first I tried Dragon, Minerva and Ustra 2-3 times each. I chose the lunch hour, 11 to 12. At Minerva, there was no canteen. Everyone was eating at nearby restaurants around the way. Therefore the school was totally empty during the lunch hour. Then at Ustra, things had changed a lot. Most programs had been moved to Midgård and Dragon. There were strictly IVIK students, ComVux students and special needs students. Hardly any normal high school students, most of which were 12th graders. I met some I knew from before, but that was really it. IVIK is for newly arrived immigrants who have to learn Swedish, and ComVux is a program for adults who have already graduated high school, or dropped out, and who want to build up their grades, often in preparation for college or university. I gave up on Ustra and Minerva right away. Ustra was done for. Later the same fall, the school was renamed Fridhemsgymnasiet. Most minorities, about 80%, went to Dragon now, and the rest mainly to Minerva. That's how it has looked each fall starting from 2011 until at least 2015 considering the new 10th graders, and I don't think that has changed very much the years after. So I got to hang at Dragon every day throughout September. There I got to know some new guys, mainly from Mariehem. Most others I already knew well, even among the 10th graders. Basically the first thing that happened when I started hanging there in September 2012 was that I got to fight one of the Frasafjortasar I had come across downtown. I bumped into him at Dragon completely unexpectedly, told my guys that we had beef, and just an hour later, without my intention, they had set up a fight in a remote location that a few years later would be discovered by the staff and even the local newspapers due to somebody snitching. During the fight I took a punch, had intended to continue but then the fight got interrupted against my will. I got to hit him stationary, which went horribly, and then it was all over. By this time I had understood how much I should have and could have fixed the diet, and thus the exercise, long ago, and thus prepared myself for this properly. But it wasn't like I was trying to fix a return match 6 months later, when I was in much better shape. The atmosphere between me and his friends downtown also got a little more serious, and I was chased by one of them downtown one weekend night. I also found some documents on the guy who chased me in the district court that fall, for milder crimes. Looking back, these guys did have a positive influence on me to some extent, with their rather serious nature. The slightly menacing mood only made me swallow my shameless anger for the time being as I was subjected to a slightly more serious trial. Otherwise, I remained just as mentally ill over the years and got stronger later for completely different reasons. My previous mistake was focusing too much on same-aged people, where I made too many mistakes to even count when it came to keeping in touch and getting respected. Leaving high school altogether after graduation didn't make anything better. But now I let the younger ones into my life even more, which was really expected since I'd known plenty of 95ers and 96ers for a long time. My neighbor also knew plenty of people down my age, meaning 10 years younger than him. That in combination with the fact that the younger ones would grow up and become older made it obvious that they would become important for my future, which has been increasingly confirmed throughout the years since I became a Muslim. With that knowledge, I've only become more open for today's high school youth, even though today's gang violence is completely out of bounds and makes me miss the old codes, which at the time almost justified the remaining crime. But most of all, it should have gotten to keep regulating today's crime, which it would have done a whole lot better than our politicians' current incitement and suggestions. Had I been exposed to that knife incident at Sprockgrend around 2020, I definitely would have wished for this. On the Friday of September 28, rapper Petter held a lecture at Folkets Hus about his childhood affected by dyslexia, ADHD and hip-hop. My mother would work backstage with him, so she got the chance to invite me to this lecture for free, while I normally would have had to pay about 100 crowns for, about $15. He turned out to have had a childhood very similar to mine. We both grew up disabled in white middle-class families, and we both got saved by hip-hop in elementary already. When he was finished, I got to walk up on stage and give him some things my mother had bought him, can't remember what. We also took a photo together which I later uploaded on Facebook. I also got his autograph. I also told him quickly that I was born in Södermalm, where he was born and raised. This became one of the best days of 2012, and I got my mother to thank for this. Since then, Umeå has had plenty of visits from rap acts who have performed at different nightclubs. I've shaken hands and taken pictures with a good number of them. On the Monday of October 1st, I was, quote, placed at YMCA. Now I got to be there every school day 9 to 12 while waiting for an internship/job. Even though I started missing Dragon now, I was only glad to have a real occupation again. I was also glad to have ended up at YMCA out of all places. I'd known about this place ever since the fall of 2008, since some blats had been there before. It was also located right in between Torren and Four Sound, so of course I had rolled past the place numerous times. The section I was placed at was called Sesame the Ladder in Swedish. There were 3 staff members, 1 intern, a university student, and then 10 to 15 people waiting for an internship/job. The quote, waiters, were mainly white people between ages 18 to 30. Some of them seemed to be or have been drug addicts. There was a computer room with about 8 to 10 computers. Usually we used the computers working with Photoshop or 3D programs. I only worked with Photoshop. Sometimes we took long walks and had other outdoor activities. Sometimes we watched lectures and did study visits. One memorable lecture was one held by a former hard drug addict. He told us about his life and how he started with cigarettes and alcohol in elementary already, only to cross over to harder drugs later, mainly speed, amphetamine. He was in his 40s and had quitted only a few years ago. During 2011, I often considered turning to drugs due to my depression. But now when I ended up here, I got a good view of drug addiction and its actual consequences, unlike the depression before that, which only gave me a false self-image. Before YMCA, I had only witnessed addiction through rappers, rock bands and movies. But now everything became much realer and detailed since I got to meet real addicts personally. I also got to learn a lot thanks to the courthouse. That's where I learned about benzodiazepines among other things. I also started studying drugs this fall. That's when I got to learn how different drugs actually affect its users more exactly. I also got to learn about the failed war on drugs, both in Sweden and the US, and how it has only made drugs worse by making them more dangerous and more requested. Thanks to all this about drugs and drug politics, I've gotten a much deeper insight on what it's like to be black in America or racialized in Sweden, and the real reason they generally hate cops. This information would have helped me a whole lot back in high school, much more so than constantly comparing myself to African Americans. I could probably write a whole chapter about this. I recommend the documentaries, The House I Live In, Breaking the Taboo, American Drug War, The Last White Hope, and How to Make Money Selling Drugs, for more information. During the same period, I also got the interpretation that ADHD ain't like other disabilities, much due to many people at YMCA and Petter having it. I saw it now as a great exception actually. It was like cannabis compared to other drugs. It is at least the total opposite of ASP. ADHD makes you impulsive and flexible, while ASP makes you rigid and, quote, nerdy. ADHD people are social, sometimes all too social, unlike those with ASP. For those with ADHD, the educational part is the bigger problem. ADHD people are also more likely to be criminals and/or addicts, while those with ASP are much less likely to be that, but more likely to be school/mosque shooters and incels instead. That's obviously the big downside to ADHD, but it also confirms all the upsides. ADHD is clearly better than ASP. It's also way too easy to get diagnosed with ADHD. Too many people with the diagnosis ain't actually disabled, and maybe that's why so many ADHD people are so normal, cause they're actually neurotypical. ASP, on the other hand, is much more obvious, and it's much less unlikely that anyone neurotypical would be diagnosed with ASP. There's no doubt I was born with ASP, but now when I look back, I realize I've always had significant symptoms of ADHD. Obviously, that's why I ran away from school in 4th and 5th grade and became so interested in hip-hop. That in turn also made me become much more ADHD, obviously. Nowadays I'm not proud of quitting Coop like that only to hang at high schools, now when I could have easily done it the previous year, when I was also much closer to the students age-wise, and then move on. On top of Coop being quite a decent place, I also took a huge, unnecessary and retarded risk, since I could wind up anywhere after that, like I was guaranteed to remain unemployed, or job-free for that matter, for the rest of my life. Had I converted the previous year, I had most likely stayed at Coop and perhaps also hung at high school before that, since it would have given me so much more than before graduation/conversion. Then when it came to the lunch thing, during the summer of 2013, I got to start working 9 to 3 p.m. at Tuesdays and Thursdays in order to need a lunchbox only twice a week, plus more diversity in working time and tasks. That could have easily saved my situation at Coop soon enough. But I'm otherwise glad I got to go to YMCA and all the places that came after that, instead of just hanging at Dragon or just staying at Coop alone. Plus, I would have missed out on a lot of important things had I not hung at Dragon after 2012 or converted then already. I surely got to learn that the coming years. I was at the latter all the way until December 2013, with exception for 2 other places where I was at for shorter periods, including Viva Resource. Since then I've been at different places, and I can easily say that the latter together with Dragon is the very most important and best place I've been at since leaving my parents' house. In late October, I considered getting rid of all the pork. I'd been eating pork 6 times a week since leaving my parents' house. I'd researched why Muslims didn't eat pork, and it turned out it was because pigs are real dirty animals, living off of mud, feces and such, while other farm animals lived mainly off of grass and hay. When I found this out, I started feeling disgusted by eating pork. Suddenly I had a hard time eating it. Then when I checked the fridge and the freezer, I saw that all the pork besides the bacon would run out on the first weekend of November. That would become the perfect opportunity for me to replace all the pork over a weekend without wasting any food. On the Sunday of November 4th, while buying groceries at ICA in Mariehamn, I took about 15 minutes to pick new meats. Then I realized that up to half of all the meat I'd been eating until then was pork, but now I was about to change all that. I'd also been interested in these new meats for the last few weeks, so now I really looked forward to trying all this, especially lamb and calf. Then I got home and took a photo of these new meats and uploaded it on Facebook. The photo got as much as 23 likes, more than any other photo I had uploaded so far. I also filmed throwing away the bacon I still had left. Having decided to remove all the pork, I got euphoric over that weekend. But this time I wasn't really happy or peaceful like the spring and summer of 2010. This time, I felt real angry and violent. I became like a violent criminal, like those I knew, like my old neighbor. That made me decide to buy a chain like many I knew had. I went through every store in downtown Umeå looking for a good, cheap chain. Then I finally found the perfect plastic silver chain for only 100 crowns, at the watch/jewelry store Euroc Pen. I took the opportunity to buy another one without any extra price. Now when I think about it, I perhaps should have converted right here, now when I for scientific reasons started doing the one thing all born Muslims do regardless of what else they do, namely refraining from pork. But at the same time, I got way too busy with all the new stuff that started happening in my life. Until the last summer, everything was so empty. That's when I had all the time and space to convert, considering all the changes it would bring and all the time it would take. Alex Jones at the time should have also pushed me over that cliff. Besides that, it was probably just that I didn't change my diet back in high school already. The winter, spring and summer of 2013. Since the last fall, I'd been considering including vegetables in my diet. Until mid-January, I'd gone my whole life without vegetables, but now it was time to change all that. I realized I could easily eat the vegetables while eating the meat and/or the starch, which would work out perfectly. I started with wok vegetables, but that didn't go too well. They were too hard to chew and it took too long to eat them. Then I switched to tomatoes, which went much better. But too often they got halfway moldy, and thus rubby and tasted real bad. Then I switched to cucumber, which went much better. They didn't taste as good as the tomatoes, but they never got moldy within the first week. You could trust them. During the summer of 2013, I added with broccoli and carrots. Then during the winter of 2014, I replaced the carrots and cucumbers with mushrooms in a vegetable mix, peas, corn and paprika, for the sake of saving time and money. Then during the summer of 2014, I replaced the broccoli with spinach, which turned out to be much better since the spinach melts much better when boiling them and could easily be mixed in with everything else. Then during March 2015, I added with pre-chopped, frozen onion in a bag, only to switch to frozen beans about a month later, since the onion in such large amounts caused me bad digestion. From about the summer and fall of 2015, I was using broccoli, carrots, mushrooms and spinach. Then in about 2018, I switched to broccoli, red beetroot, mushrooms/Brussels sprouts, which get to take turns regularly, and spinach. I quickly learned to love vegetables, after having hated them my whole life without even trying them. The food not only becomes much more healthy, but also much more juicy and complete. Nowadays I consider vegetables obligatory for all meals. Without them, the food becomes so dry and incomplete, like a skeleton without muscles or a house without furniture. That in combination with quitting pork made me much better at eating vegetarian, which I hardly ever did otherwise. Later I became even more vegetarian after I started eating strictly halal meat in February 2016. This would affect me especially at restaurants unless they served only halal meat. However, I gave up the halal rule in September 2022 and went back to only abstaining from pork like I'd already done before Islam. Now I've realized my garbage diet has at large been the root cause for a lot of misery since junior high, obviously because it became the main solution to this depression. I thought I was healthy only because I never smoked and hardly ever drank, but man, I was wrong. I remember the winter of 2010 when I got to learn about Illuminati's food poisoning and how they had tried to destroy public health through fast food chains like McDonald's. I just told myself I don't eat at McDonald's or any other similar place, which I hadn't done since 2007 I think. I can also remember thinking a few times that a better diet would make me less angry, and thus more complacent and indifferent, meaning less quote, ghetto/blat, and more middle-class/white. Not much different from the way a lot of youth look at, for example, smoking. But at the same time, I actually wanted peace of mind, which I somehow achieved later during 2010 despite continuing my garbage diet. But you know what that led to? Not much later, but I never expected it then. I thought I'd become bulletproof, and rightfully so. I'd made it real far in life, but still I had so much left to sort out. With simple logic, I should have changed my diet back in 9th or 10th grade just to eat quote, more normally, meaning eat everything, unlike now when I added with new limitations for the sake of health and later Islam. It obviously would have been good for my health even though it still would have been far from perfect. It couldn't be more obvious that ASP was the reason my diet was so one-sided and limited when I was little and unable to make any decision of my own. I should have however thought about it as a teen already since I so desperately wanted to be normal, but I saw no relevance in changing my diet, not even just throwing the pig. Mad hypocritical. I also became more ASP because of my garbage diet, both in terms of the plate's appearance and my inner well-being. It was also the main reason my workout constantly failed, and also the main reason I for once got a grip on it. With that knowledge, I would have been able to ride the bike a lot more, and thus take it to the hood and back more easily. Now I lived right in the middle of it all, but then it became easier taking the bike to and from my parents who still lived in Grubbe. I noticed the difference especially when it was below 32 Fahrenheit, 0 Celsius, and even more so if there was snow. I became less dependent on the bus. It also became much easier walking around in other cities. My legs healed much faster when I got home. The way I eat now, I've become more like both normal whites and non-whites, much because the food has become more exotic and foreign, more affected by non-Western cuisines. Above exchanging the pork for the lamb and calf, I've also added plenty of spices like cinnamon, turmeric, oregano, etc. I've realized how badly retarded I was for thinking that a better diet would make me, quote, whiter, like I would become whiter by exercising better and perhaps even fight better if I may, maybe even grow better facial hair. That being said, I also should have helped out more with house chores just to prove and improve my normality. I surely realized that once I moved out of the house. I've often thought if only it wasn't for Alex Jones, I would have definitely converted right after I moved out. Somewhat true, but now it was really that I didn't fix my diet back in high school. Even if I still would have started streaming Alex Jones 24/7 during 2010 and kept going from there, the diet would have definitely made me less dependent on him emotionally and spiritually. I would have gotten more out of both him and all other aspects of life simply, with or without converting sooner. I surely would have been gradually closer to Islam all along, and sometimes have blamed my parents a little for my garbage diet, but as you see here above, I really only got myself to blame for this one. I'm sure they tried to make me eat my vegetables when I was real little, but of course I couldn't do it already then. During late March, I left ICSU. After having been there for almost 10 months, I realized I could easily do all those exercises at home, without all the machines and stuff. I really needed ICSU during the last summer, but now I needed to start exercising at home. It took so much time and thinking to pack the bag and then empty it and such. It really was 2 or 3 Rubik's Cubes a week. I also lost about 4,500 crowns, about $640 to $750 on the annual ICSU membership card. I earned 60 to 90 minutes for every workout I did at home instead of ICSU, plus I also only needed to put on the workout clothes. This would definitely save the coming spring and summer, now when I was free on Mondays and Wednesdays. One Friday during April, when I had the day off from YMCA, I visited Ustra/Friedhelm at around 12. I had only planned on walking around the school reminiscing good old memories. But then I bumped into all the 12th graders that were still there since the fall of 2010. As much as I gained out of this visit, I tried Dragon the next Friday right after leaving YMCA. I hadn't been there at all since September except for a few times when I had the day off. As good as that also went, I started hanging there every single Friday right after YMCA, or any other place for that matter. I've hardly ever worked more than 20 hours a week, and hardly ever after 12 on Fridays. For some shorter periods I could hang there every day, all the way from about 11 to 1 p.m. Now I realized my mistake by not starting being there in March 2012 already when I started working at 4 Sound, not to forget all the time before that. On the Saturday of May 18th or 25th, it was Coltornada. I had yelled at some frassers earlier in the day, the other crew from Eastern Umeå, and later I hung out with some guys downtown that evening. Then we saw one of the frassers there alone. I told them I got beef with him, and then one of the guys had a chat with him. He got quite aggressive and the guy was obviously scared to have like 10 mostly older dudes against him now, and these were not at all criminals. It was still light outside, plenty of people around and also a cop car, although probably empty, within sight. Later that evening I ran into some other frassers and then one of them said, "Is it peace now?" Now it clearly looked like everything was calm, and right then and there I should have realized at once how easy it really was to get them to back off, or avoid them altogether for that matter. The most positive thing I actually got out of all these beefs was precisely that one of them was threatened by one of my friends, which caused the others to back off as well, at least temporarily. He cleaned up his act at once, and ever since then things have actually been completely cool between us. But it didn't really stop there. Another frasser continued to mess around completely unaffected, and what did I do about it but continue having outbursts? Nothing. A memorable occasion is when he pulled down his pants, though without pulling down his underpants, right in front of me at Brenbels Iren, just outside the night party on campus. He reminded me a lot of rapper Soulja Boy and also the cartoon Penguin Pingu. Later on he would also remind me of the character Modi from the Netflix series Top Boy. Brenbels Iren takes place during the last weekend in May or the first weekend in June, both Friday and Saturday and sometimes longer. During the day, people play Brenball, similar to baseball, on the open field right next to Brentus where I've often had gym class, and then it crosses over to partying at night. Until and during 2012, The evening parties had taken place out on the street at Oldham on the north side, largely because the event is centered around university students. But then starting from 2013, the parties have been moved to set up tents on campus where you have to pay for entry. In the spring of 2014, I managed to get another of these frassers threatened, after he had started messing around again. I did what I actually should have done from the start. I sent his name and address to 3 friends via private chat, EncroChat at the time, haha, and a few weeks later, I was told that one of them had talked to him, and since then I've never interacted with him at all. I didn't have an outburst here, nor did I make a public FB thing about this. But this guy that I just wrote about I kept completely ignoring. I probably expected him to stop now, but no, not even that. On the Sunday of July 14th, I found René Voltaire's protein powder, made of hemp, at Ika Marihem. I'd always had low confidence in protein products since they always contained all these weird ingredients. I heard one time about a product containing amphetamine out of all things. But finally I found something that contained nothing wrong at all. Thanks to this, exercising went instantly way better. Before this, I had severe muscle aches for several days, but now I could recover fully right away just by drinking a glass of milk with this powder, plus some cocoa powder. Thanks to this in combination with other diet changes plus leaving ICSU, I've managed to upgrade my exercising heavily since then. Since I left ICSU, I could eat directly after the workout in order to build better muscles. Not that I ever managed to become a bodybuilder, but I sure became physically stronger. But that's nothing compared to how much I've developed mentally for the last years. That's what truly matters. The pen becomes with time mightier than the sword. Then during August, I found Utrecrum's Aloe Vera toothpaste, which doesn't contain poisons such as sodium fluoride. For a long time I'd wanted to get off the tooth pills I'd been using since about age 7. I only used mainstream toothpaste until about that age, and then I started again first after leaving my parents' house. I had tried quitting the pills a few times before, which only led to toothache, alternatively abstinence maybe. But now when I switched the toothpaste, I managed to get off the pills, and thus get rid of all the sodium fluoride. Alhamdulillah, all praise is due to God. The Illuminati has poisoned the American tap water system with sodium fluoride in order to dumb down the population. The Nazis also used it to dumb down camp prisoners. That's why I wanted to get off the crap. I can only wonder how hard it screwed me, also in combination with my rotten diet. Now when I'd left ICSU, I could ride around the hood a lot more often, and just like before, I got stuck in Oldham much more often than elsewhere. But this summer, I also got stuck quite often in Eersbuda, but only 2 times in Marihem. By quote, getting stuck, I mean that I stayed somewhere for a while due to bumping into people. I got stuck in Eersbuda even more often the next summer, 2014, usually the basketball court at Spaangrend, known as Cage, located in the most heavily racialized parts of Eersbuda, or better yet the entire city. I guarantee we're talking at least 50%. One thing that made this spring and summer so great was that I really bumped into people of all ages, ranging from those my age down to junior high school kids. I really couldn't complain about any lack of same-aged people, like I did way too often during 2011. But it was really that I'd gotten such a good grip on my own life, especially when it came to diet and exercise. Otherwise, I still had a lot to sort out, knowing what I know now. Actually, same-aged people have always been there more or less. It was just that I, as well as they, had left high school and I was worried I'd never get to leave my parents' house. That in combination with my garbage diet is what destroyed me. But it's true, though I actually had poor contact with same-aged people from the fall of 2012 to the spring of 2014, with an obvious exception for the spring and summer in between there.